Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Thursday edition of Point of View, and over the next couple hours, we're going to cover a lot of issues, but we were planning to talk about Kabul and Afghanistan, and we're going to be talking about it even more so, maybe even pushing some of the other material we were going to talk about later to the program, or maybe even till tomorrow. If you have not heard, the U.S. ambassador in Kabul has already told his staff, and thus we now can confirm that 4 U.S. Marines were killed in an explosion at the city's airport, 3 more wounded, and, of course, the actual death toll is up to 60 at this point. So we're talking about lots of Afghanistan men, women, and just very tragic children. This is due to a suicide bomber. An explosion that took place at Abbey Gate was probably a fairly complex attack, because there was also a second explosion near the Baron Hotel, which is a short distance away from Abbey Gate there at the airport. And, of course, you have the usual kind of statements being made that this will not disrupt the actual airlift taking place, and yet the people on the ground saying, yes, it has. And so you have to sort of sort through the various things that are being said by the State Department and help understand what this means in terms of the lives of those still on the ground. My first article that we have posted today, which we'll just briefly quote from, and then I want to try to give some context to it, is entitled "Leave No American Behind," and it is a piece that came out from the National Review, in which they open with a statement by former President Richard Nixon, who warned against the United States acting like a pitiful, helpless giant. And as they said, he would never even have been able to fathom the events in Kabul. This is now worse than it was even when this was written, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an understanding for a few minutes what it is like there on the ground. The Taliban, first of all, have actually set a deadline that requires that the president keep to his deadline. Now, he was with the G7 nations the other day, being encouraged to push past that August 31st deadline, which is next Tuesday, and actually hopes that indeed they can evacuate all the Americans by next Tuesday. But as you will see when we start running the numbers, that is very much, well, that was in doubt before the explosion and just the chaos right now at the airport. And even though the number of evacuations have picked up, 19,000 people flown out just in the last 24 hours when this was written. But still, even then, 10,000 waiting at the airport, some of those, of course, killed by this suicide bomber. And if you believe that the Taliban is controlling the city, how did an ISIS suicide individual bomber come through unless that was done with their permission, or at least without their surveillance? So we have no more information about that than what we have, of course, been able to report here in just the few minutes in which this is unfolded. But let's, if we can, give you a little bit of an idea of what it was like, at least at 8 o'clock this morning when this was reported, before we had the explosion. And that is, Jim Garrity says, first of all, don't let the happy talk coming from well-dressed officials in behind lecterns in Washington, D.C. fool you, because the situation on the ground, even before this explosion, was grim. And I thought I would just read one piece that his reader actually posted, because it gives you a little bit of an idea of what it is like for especially the Afghanis who wonder if they're going to be able to get out, and many of whom have already seen a friend, a neighbor, a family member beheaded. Some of those are taking place in the middle of a village or a community so that everybody sees that. But the reader that he quotes from said, all of these individuals that we are trying to get out used to work for our company. They are engineers, electricians, lab technicians, urban planners, CAD drafters, surveyors, concrete, masons, welders, all skilled technical and professional people who enjoyed what we would consider to be a middle-class life. Some went on to become lecturers at university. They aren't herders and farmers. They are civilized, educated, middle-class tradesmen and professionals who trusted their government to maintain the safety and security of the nation. Their average age of their parents is late 30s. The average family size is 7. The youngest child among them is 10 days old. Inside a month, their lives will be uprooted by these barbarians. They are hunted because they what? Helped Americans. One of our families has been waiting at the entry control point for 4 days straight, living in trash and filth with no shelter, jammed among thousands of others. The parents know full well what awaits if they are fortunate to get out. They are willing to live the life in a refugee camp near a military installation, essentially a one-room United Nations Refugee Center shack, or a group of expeditionary tents. No indoor plumbing, no kitchen. They share public toilets and showers and live in a fenced compound in a sea of other shacks or tents surrounded by gravel for at least 12 to 18 months while they wait for the State Department to process their visas. They are willing to walk away from their middle-class comforts and live in refugee camps for well over a year, possibly 2, for the freedom and liberty of the United States. This individual said, asked me yesterday if I could get him to Mexico so he could walk to Texas so he wouldn't have to live in a refugee camp. They know. And so, again, you can see that this is the kind of situation that is unfolding right now. And the illustrations that people have used are pretty hard to imagine as well. One said it's kind of like being locked in a burning building and all the doors are locked. You can't get out. You can't do anything. And you recognize that, of course, the first priority has always been to get American citizens out of the airport, as well as the people that are lawful permanent residents. So many of them are further down, if you will, the pecking order. And this is really just, if nothing else, just a sad commentary indeed on what is taking place. Well, when you start looking at the numbers, the best numbers I'm coming up with could be as much as 250,000 people that still need to get out if you're talking about all of the Afghanis in that particular case. And that, of course, is assuming that this particular airlift actually is implemented pretty quickly after this horrific suicide bombing that took place at the airport. Real serious doubt about whether or not we can get those individuals out in time. And of course, this whole article that we've posted here for you to read talks about the fact that a functional and self-respecting superpower would have told the Taliban at the outset of the crisis that they are staying there until every American and every ally of the United States got out, no matter how long it took. But instead, we have the president in this particular case saying we're going to do our best to try to fit to a timetable by those barbarians that are now responsible not only for the beheadings that have been taking place, but I think probably allowed for the ISIS suicide bomber to come and blow people up. We'll take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We will do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
G.K. Chesterton once observed, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. Dennis Prager starts off with that quote to illustrate that nature has become a substitute God for many today. It's not surprising. Many pagan religions have some form of nature worship. They worship the sun god, the moon god, or the goddess of fertility. Today, there's a religious foundation to the environmental movement. We need to protect Mother Earth. Back in the 1970s, James Lovelock developed the Gaia hypothesis and more recently noted that environmentalism has become a religion. But nature worship has run into some tough times with this virus pandemic. Nature can be beautiful, but nature can also be brutal. Alfred Tennyson described nature as red in tooth and claw. There are no moral laws. It's the survival of the fittest. So how should Christians think about nature? Well, first, nature is part of the fallen world and should not be worshipped. G.K. Chesterton explained, nature is not our mother, nature is our sister. We can be proud of her beauty since we have the same father, but she has no authority over us. Second, in Genesis 1:28, God commands us to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. Being fruitful, that is having children, is just the opposite of what environmentalists would allow. One of my professors at Yale was the founder of Zero Population Growth, dedicated to limiting the number of children that could be born. Moreover, environmentalists and animal rights activists reject the idea that humans should subdue nature and have dominion over the earth. An article by Lynn White in the 1960s even blamed Christians and this passage in Genesis for our environmental problems. This pandemic is a reminder that nature is not our friend and nature is not our God. The Christian worldview is the true picture of reality. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just give you an overview of what we're going to be covering over the next couple of hours. John Guandolo will be with us. We'll be talking about kind of the national security situation. That was planned even before this, but it is a good illustration that sometimes when we have our Muslim friends, neighbors, and coworkers, they are very peace-loving individuals, but this has been a very stark reminder today that some didn't get the memo. And so as a result, as we are bringing more and more people into this country, and will be, who have a Muslim background, most of them come here because they value the freedom and the opportunity that they would gain in this country. But along with them, no doubt, will be some individuals that intend us harm. And of course, we have those who want to turn a blind eye to that. So we'll be talking with him about this particular issue. And then just to get away from some of this for a while, we'll have a chance next hour to be talking about this new book that's been out a couple of months, The Relational Intelligent Child, and it is written by Dr. John Trent, who will be with us by phone, and Dr. Dewey Wilson, which will be with us in studio. One of my other articles that I've posted here for you today, and that may be about all we'll get to, is the relationship between China and the Taliban, because I've brought this up on a couple of occasions to point out that this is really a significant issue. The Taliban is an enemy. You wouldn't know that by some of the statements being made right now by by this administration's State Department. But the real enemy ultimately are people like Iran and China and others. And Mike Huckabee, who has been a friend of this ministry for some time, matter of fact, will be speaking for us at an event here in Dallas in about a month or so, actually has written a very good piece about this. And also, not only is Mike Huckabee in this piece, but he also quotes from Gordon Chang, who we've had by phone and in studio because he's written about China as well. And it helps maybe us understand some of this because even as I have spoken here in the class, or in my class, or even in this particular program, we have talked about how China's embassy stayed open, and China has actually seen this as a great opportunity to develop a relationship with the Taliban. And I've explained that if you follow the money, you can understand that. But Mike Huckabee goes into it in a little more detail. So let me read from his piece, which comes from the stream. And if you would like to read it in its entirety, it's on our website, pointofview.net. First of all, let me just mention that he quotes from an investigative reporter who actually had been on the Tucker Carlson show the other night, and she says that this fiasco in Afghanistan doesn't just empower Al-Qaeda and the terrorist offensive, or even the Taliban, it empowers every enemy the United States has. And he says, in particular, this really applies to China, which, according to China analysts he quotes from, Gordon Chang, who we've had on the program, has ties with the Taliban that go back 20 years before 9/11. So he says, starts out by asking a very interesting question. Does anyone think that it was odd that the Chinese embassy in Kabul stayed open as the Taliban took over Afghanistan? After all, ours was pretty much ready to close down. The Taliban and the Communist Party of China must have had some kind of understanding, Mike Huckabee says. In contrast, we know that what happened to our embassy as the Taliban advanced and Biden retreated, in effect surrendered. Our State Department abandoned their embassy building. The Taliban sacked it. They took all the files left behind that identified Afghans who had helped America. And, of course, we know what is unfortunately going to happen to those who do actually stay or are left behind. As Gordon Chang reports on a particular story, the Chinese foreign minister met with senior Taliban officials July 28th in one of the Chinese cities, and the next step is for China to officially recognize the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Now, if you listened just the other day, I pointed out that particular name has significance, something which I think was not well appreciated by those in the State Department when Donald Trump was the president, and certainly not appreciated by those in the State Department now that the president is Joe Biden. Anyway, Mike Huckabee goes on to say that this association between the Taliban and China is nothing new. He says, I wonder if we'll ever know what role, if any, China might have played in the attack on the Twin Towers 20 years ago, which is pretty provocative comment from him. Mike Huckabee goes on to say, apparently, one of the telecommunications companies and others worked on Kabul's telecom system 2 years before that. Right after 9/11, a spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that China had no formal relations with the Taliban, that the only ties they had were on the working level, and the reports of China building telecom networks and dams for the Taliban were unfounded rumors. And again, Mike Huckabee asked the question, does anyone buy that? If recent events have brought about one thing, he says, I hope it's a total lack of patience with being lied to over and over. Seriously, he said, can we believe anything that the Communist Chinese Party tells us about the virus? Can we believe anything the Taliban tells us about letting Americans into the airport? For that matter, can we believe anything our own administration says? And of course, he then begins to bring some examples of where the press secretary, Jen Psaki, just seems to say just about anything comes up to her mind at that point, and with a fleeting smile can call out reporter Peter Doocy as irresponsible for suggesting that Americans are stranded outside of the airport in Kabul when we know that's exactly what they were. Then we can't trust anything that our leaders are telling us, says Mike Huckabee. He goes on to say that when Biden assures us that we'll get all the Americans out who want to leave, his implication is that some Americans don't want to leave, which has got to be, as he says, a huge whopper, and it insults our intelligence. They all want to leave. I'm tired of being lied to. As you read through this, you'll see that Mike Huckabee's patience has worn pretty thin. But let's again go back to this particular issue, because he quotes again from Gordon Chang, who we've had on the program, and I've had him both in studio and by phone. But he says that if you look at the Electronic Engineering Times, they reported in the aftermath of 9/11 that the Indian intelligence officials believe that the telecom company in China, which is related to the telecom company in India, supplied the communication surveillance equipment to the Taliban in Afghanistan. That particular group denied the charge, and a Chinese foreign ministry spokeswoman said it was misleading. Not untrue, but again, who knows how accurate or inaccurate it might be. Mike Huckabee goes on to say that China has also been the main supplier of small arms to the Taliban and insurgents in Iraq, a vast array of weaponry and ammo, some of which were shipped by dirty arms merchants directly from China's factories. Some weapons were routed through intermediaries in Iran and Pakistan, but central Chinese authorities had to know where they were headed, as there would have been government surveillance every step of the way. Gordon Chang singles out a series of U.S. presidents, notably George W. Bush, for looking the other way. So then again, another question from Mike Huckabee. So why would our leaders just let this go on? And he says, recall that at a time, the thinking was to bring China into the international system, to engage China, to indulge China, to trade with China, to fund Chinese labs in order to study a number of things. And of course, the argument back in 2001 doesn't seem to be quite as compelling 20 years later in 2021. He says it turned out we couldn't trust China, and the optimism is gone when it comes to dealing with that totalitarian state. After what Gordon Chang calls 2 decades of aggressive, malicious, and provocative acts, we can no longer overlook their dangerous conduct. It's not just the Taliban who must be held accountable for their terrorist atrocities. It is also their number one sponsor, China. He says, I have to wonder what Gordon Chang, who wrote the book The Coming Collapse of China, is thinking of China's position of power right now. Who exactly is collapsing? Our once dependable power center, the Oval Office, is now a vacuum, a black hole in our universe that compares to nothing in a previous experience. So China is sitting, as he says, in the catbird seat at the moment and will use this time as productively as possible. China also says it has plans to coordinate with Iran and Russia on joint naval drills in the Persian Gulf, either late this year or early next year. The 3 countries pulling together for similar exercises in 2019. The plan is going to be an annual event. I've written about a piece next week about whether or not China now might feel that the United States is too weak to see this as an opportunity to maybe even go into Taiwan and to capture Taiwan. Might not do that until after the Chinese Winter Olympics in February, but could happen in the future. And all of this due to the collapse and withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. We come back, we're going to talk about what this might mean for national security with John Guandolo, and all that coming up right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View.
The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue conversation. If you are just joining us, of course, what we talked at the top of the hour, already 4 U.S. Marines killed, 3 wounded, as well as maybe a death toll now up to 60 because of these explosions at the airport and the hotel. And we will continue to follow that. But we already had planned to schedule some conversation about Islam and about our national security situation. Let me just mention that if you're looking for information, my booklet that I'm holding up right now on Islam helps you understand kind of the Muslim viewpoint, and certainly that is one that we would certainly encourage you to get. One that we wrote quite a while ago on Sharia law. Certainly these booklets are available through Point of View, and of course maybe hold up my book as well, Understanding Islam and Terrorism. When we talk about what is happening overseas, we also have to recognize some of that comes here to the United States, and so I thought it would be very appropriate for you to have a chance to hear from John Guandolo, who is the president and founder of Understanding the Threat. We have a link to that on our website at pointofview.net. He involves himself in advising various governments on matters related to national security, in particular looking at this global Islamic movement. He's been a guest lecturer at the Joint Forces Staff College at the U.S. Army War College. He is the co-author of a number of books: Sharia, The Threat to America, Raising a Jihadi Generation, Islam's Deception, The Truth About Sharia, and we have information about those books that you can find at his website. So, John, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thanks for having me, Kerby. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to share truth with audiences like yours.
And again, I think it was Jenny Gilchrist who first suggested we have you on, and you certainly have been speaking to a number of groups. So if, as we go through this, somebody says, I'd like to have you come to speak to my civic group or my political group or maybe my church group, that is certainly something else that is available. And even right now, as we're talking about moving so many Afghanis from Afghanistan to the United States, first a refugee camp, eventually to the United States, we recognize most of those people will come here because they want to enjoy the freedom of America. They may be entrepreneurs. But the other day I was hearing a story of an individual that said that the particular translator he had with him in Afghanistan eventually led them into an ambush with the Taliban. And even though they thought he was trustworthy, they found out that he was working for the Taliban. So whether these are people coming in through the airlift, people that are crossing our southern border, or already here because of a visa, we have to recognize that even though we have a lot of friends, neighbors, and coworkers who are Muslims who don't intend evil, there are those which you have been paying attention to that really do intend the destruction of this country. Tell us more, if you might.
Well, I think the discussion, based on what you just kind of laid out, I think we need to begin the discussion by saying here we are in 2021, in a war that America has raged in numerous countries. We've been waging war since certainly September of 2001, and I would argue before that, against the same adversary. And our leaders, our generals and our national security leadership, our presidents, the leaders of our key agencies, be it the Defense Intelligence Agency, the CIA, the FBI, have made an affirmative decision not to know and understand the enemy. And when they have taken the time to listen, the very people specifically, and we can do this by name, that they bring in to advise them, we can identify as a matter of legal fact and evidence, are enemies. Their desires, their objectives are the same as Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and ISIS and Hezbollah and Iran. And that's all on record. And what I have found over the years, I've been doing this 19 years, what I find is fascinating is when we present to federal agents in our training programs or police on the Joint Terrorism Task Force or just patrol officers who don't really know anything about the kind of the terrorism issue, if you will, they're shocked at how easy this information is to obtain. And all we're doing as understanding the threat when we teach is we put it all together and share it with them. Because the evidence in terrorism trials, the largest terrorism trials in U.S. history, when you look at the evidence, you look at what the enemy is doing, what they're saying, they're very well organized, and they all say exactly what they're doing. So while I agree with you, there are people who identify themselves as Muslims who do not intend us harm. That doesn't change what Islam is and what Islam teaches to children in U.S. Islamic schools, because what's taught in U.S. Islamic schools about Islam is exactly what the Taliban and Al-Qaeda teach.
And again, one of the things that we've done even earlier in this week, I quoted from Andrew McCarthy, who I know you know. And of course, we've had him on. We've had Frank Gaffney on and others. And to a person, they say that there is kind of this assumption that Islam is a religion of peace, although there are peaceful Muslims. A good example is the ISIS suicide bomber today, and all of the Taliban didn't get the memo, because we are talking about a very virulent view that is almost always papered over by, and whether you're talking about a Republican president like George W. Bush or a Democratic president like Barack Obama, they always have this almost inability to look at the reality of what is a very significant movement to try to bring in Sharia law and destroy the foundations of American democracy and countries in the West all over the world.
That's right. And I would just ask your listeners, what does Islam say its purpose is? And the way you find the answer to that is not to ask a Muslim. It's to read the books that they use to teach Muslims, be they adults or children, in U.S. mosques and Islamic schools and organizations. And unanimously, the normative and universally taught Islamic doctrine says the purpose of Islam is to wage war on the non-Muslim community until Sharia is the law of the land. Period. That's it. And so I would challenge somebody, find an authoritative book of Islamic law, and you can find them in U.S. mosques and mosque bookstores. Look at the most widely used textbooks to teach 10 and 11-year-olds in U.S. Islamic schools or European Islamic schools or African Islamic schools. I've got those textbooks right here in my study because I've read dozens of them, and they all say the exact same thing because that's what Islam teaches. And I think the fact that we have American generals and political leaders who have been told by Islamic leaders something about Islam that is exactly opposite of what U.S. Muslim children learn in U.S. Islamic schools about Islam, the question has to be answered, because somebody's lying, and are Islamic leaders lying to U.S. leaders, or are Muslim children being lied to by Muslim teachers in Islamic schools? But somebody's lying, because our leaders, their understanding of Islam is exactly opposite of what 10-year-old Muslim children are being taught in U.S. Islamic schools. And the fact that we've now waged war officially for 20 years, and in no national security document have we identified the enemy in these wars, is the very reason Afghanistan's imploding. It's the very reason we lost in Iraq and Syria. Despite the fact our military crushed this enemy on the battlefield, we lost because our generals and our political leaders decided we don't actually need to be professional. We don't actually need to do a professional analysis of this enemy, even though 100% of the people we kill or capture on the battlefield, or who have been killed or captured in the United States and Europe, Fort Hood shooter, Boston Marathon bombers, 9/11 hijackers, the young jihadi from Chattanooga, Tennessee, who killed 4 Marines and a Navy sailor, or the Muslim who blew himself up right there in Afghanistan today, killing, again, I think 5 is the current death toll, or 4 or 5, I don't know what the current update is, of our troops. And our leaders have decided, you know what, wait, we'll just get the Muslim Brotherhood to advise us. So we'll get, Mohammed Majid who's the leader, one of the senior Muslim Brotherhood leaders, or we'll get the Al-Qaeda financier, Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, to work with the State Department and the Department of Education and advise President Clinton, or we'll fill in another name. And so we're going to get advised. We're going to bring in Anwar al-Awlaki, the leader of Al-Qaeda in Yemen, to brief at the Pentagon. I mean, this is why we're losing, because our leadership is catastrophically unprofessional, and I would argue criminally negligent.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, there are some great programs that Understanding the Threat has, and some of you might say, okay, I recognize the problem. What are we doing about it? And how can I implement some of that in my community? We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, and we are privileged to have with us for just a little bit longer John Guandolo, and he is, again, the president of Understanding the Threat. You can go to understandingthethreat.com. Also, we, of course, have a link to that on our website, pointofview.net. And, John, I think there are a lot of people that already are sort of in lockstep with what you've been saying, since we've had so many different guests on over the years talking about Islam, talking about Sharia law, talking about Sharia supremacy, and the rest, but they sort of wonder, is there anything we can do? And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on, because if you go to your website, you have a whole thing on UTT training, some really great training that takes place. And if you have, and we broadcast in about 40 different states, so if our listeners, no matter what state they are in, maybe have people in their local police force that don't really understand Sharia law, don't understand the potential threat, or there are people that are maybe in the government that they work with, in the city council or the legislature, there are some great resources that you have for training as well as a lot of videos. Can we kind of work through some of the material on your website?
Absolutely, and I appreciate the opportunity to do it. And first of all, I think it's worth noting, if you go to the section on our website, one of the pages, which is UTT support, we've got a letter in there. We call it the executive letter, but it's signed by former directors of the CIA and DIA that explains how vitally important the work we do is. And when we train anybody, but I want to specifically talk about local and state police and federal agents, when we do our 3-day training program for them about how to understand and uncover these networks in their local communities, we always ask 2 questions in the end, and the unanimous response is always this. Number 1, and this includes people that have served or are serving on the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. 1, they say we've never heard this information, and 2, we think it's critical to protecting our community.
Wow.
And as just a note to your listeners who may have no idea who I am or understanding the threat is, in 2006, I put together and created the first training program on the kinds of things we're talking about here in the U.S. government. And that program was run twice in 2006 and 2007, and nothing like it has been run since inside the FBI, where I was at the time, or any of the other government agencies, because we went in 2004, 5, and 6 from being very interested about wanting to understand this more to when it became politically incorrect, and the Islamic advisors working with the Secretary of Defense or the Undersecretary of Defense with the FBI, with the CIA, the State Department, they all raised Cain and said, hey, these classes are offensive. Well, they were offensive because we were speaking truthfully about who they were and what they were doing. So we have developed training programs over the years, I have and my team has, to specifically share with people. And depending on where they are, whether you're a homicide investigator, whether you work in border security or DEA or police, so we have numerous variations of that, but the 3-day program is kind of the core, where we teach people about what the hostile networks are doing. And it's just not just the jihadi networks, because the jihadis at the ground level are working with the communists here in the United States and at the national and international level. And so you've got to tie that in, because their funding, their direct logistical support, and direct operational support. We've got Antifa, a communist group. We've got FBI documents demonstrating they've traveled overseas, Antifa in Oakland, to work with ISIS and Al-Qaeda and get training on bomb making and chemical weapons and other kinds of things to do attacks here in the U.S. We see communist groups like Communist Party USA, Democratic Socialists of America, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, working directly with Hamas groups and other Muslim Brotherhood groups, Islamic Society in North America, Islamic Circle North America, Muslim Students Association, across the United States. And so these 2 very significant networks are working together. So our training programs are not just built for police. As a matter of fact, I think the most important training program we do is our Into Action program, which literally is meant to teach these things to citizens and show them how to build teams of patriots at the local level to actually identify and disrupt these networks at the local level. And it includes helping educate local leaders, helping to educate police. But and we find it's more times than not, local officials and local police don't do anything. So it ends up, we've built teams around the country. We need to build many more. They're actually doing great work, all constitutionally protected activity, all lawful, but in some cases very aggressive, really disrupting the bad guys at the local level. And it's really exciting. And quite frankly, for the patriots, it's really empowering. And that's what we do. We teach them not only here's who they are and how to find them. Here's the way they operate, and here are a whole host of things you can do to disrupt them and kind of render them incapable of doing what they're doing in your community. And that's why it's a huge portion of our focus these days, because many leaders in various levels of the community, they're kind of closing their eyes and hoping all this just goes away. It's citizens need to engage and get involved.
Well, again, we have a very involved audience, so let me first of all encourage you to go to understandingthethreat.com. We have that link there. I might just mention that, John, you have a place under Contact Us. First of all, people can get on your mailing list, but also if they'd want to have you come and speak or come and do a training or educate maybe law enforcement or educate their own community, especially right now since we aren't facing the kinds of lockdowns as before, you're available for coming to speak to some of these groups and do some of the training, aren't you?
That's right. So we have regular online and in-person training. So, for instance, our next Into Action Online is the beginning of October, but we just had a group say, hey, we would like to, just for our group, do an online Into Action program. We had one last month say, hey, we'd like you to come and do the 3-day program in person. So our team went up there and did that. And so we will work with our schedules to get this done. But the Into Action program, if you go to our contact page and say, I'd like more information on that, I'd like to get into that because I have a group of 10 or 20 people, and we would really like to know how to engage. And it doesn't matter if you say, well, I'm already engaged in a group and we do, we work with the state legislature on education reform. That's okay. When you go through this program, it is going to open your eyes to the reality of many of these individuals and organizations in these hostile networks that are really corrupting the system is what they're doing. You're going to see that they're involved at the state and local level with your school board, with the Chamber of Commerce, with your interfaith outreach to Christians and in the Christian and Jewish community. They're involved in all of these issues, election fraud issues. They're right in the middle of that. So we encourage people, no matter what they're already into, to do this because you're going to learn, you're going to truly, I believe, be empowered with a lot of tools to make you much more effective at what you're already doing and to open your eyes that we need to be doing a lot more.
Yes. Understandingthethreat.com. We have the link, of course, at our website, pointofview.net. John, thank you for being with us, and I encourage all of you to get involved, and we have all sorts of information there for you right on our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. When we come back, in studio, Dr. Dewey Wilson, by phone, Dr. John Trent. We'll change topics. I'm ready. I'm sure you are as well. We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
We sometimes talk about intelligence and IQ and intelligence quotient. Sometimes we even talk about emotional intelligence. But what about this idea of relational intelligence? That is the topic we're going to be focusing on because of this new book that came across my desk, The Relationally Intelligent Child, 5 Keys to Helping Your Kids Connect Well with Others. Came from a good friend who's sitting across from me, Dr. Dewey Wilson, who is the founder and CEO of Strong Marriages. And, of course, is an individual that has been involved in all sorts of different aspects of marriage, family, child raising, and the rest. And he also has co-authored that with Dr. John Trent. When I got these two individuals on the same program, this is going to be really interesting. So, Dewey, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, Kerby. It's my pleasure. It's just wonderful to be here.
Let me also welcome John Trent. Dr. John Trent, of course, the president and founder of Strong Families, an individual that's written so many different books. And John, it is always great to have you on the program with us.
Well, thanks. Great to be with both of you. Thank you.
I might just mention to our listeners that this book is out, came out in about April, so you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. We have a link to both of your websites so they can get it there. We also have other information about that. I would encourage people to get something to write with and maybe number 1 to 5, because we're going to talk about the different aspects of this idea of relational intelligence. But Dewey, let me come to you for just a minute, because in some respects this is a new topic, and many people maybe have never heard about this idea of relational intelligence and how we begin to pass this on to our children and grandchildren.
Well, that's right, Kerby. And actually, the way the title came after I did my, I went back to school to get my PhD at the age of, well, when I started, I was only about 56 years old. And, I thought, well, you know what, maybe I'll pick a topic that'll be a slam dunk. And so my topic was millennial narcissism, because, I mean, right. How many of us haven't heard that we think that millennials are narcissists and have narcissist behavior? But the reality of what I found out in my research, Kerby, was that millennials are not subclinical narcissists, nor are they clinical narcissists. What we found is that they're just lacking incredibly in interpersonal skills.
Right.
And those interpersonal skills, as you alluded to just a minute ago, that typically in past generations have been handed down from their parents and their grandparents. And so Dr. Trent, he had been asked to write a book on parenting, and he said, why don't we just co-author this book and we talk about relational intelligence. Yeah. And we're relational, like you said a while ago, IQ talks more about a quotient. Right. It is a capacity-based learning tool. And so when you think about relational intelligence is more of a ability. So it's actually really just exercising our God-given ability to relate well with others, because each one of us have the innate ability to relate. It's just oftentimes so much of it also comes from the environment that we're raised in.
John Trent, let me come to you, because when we're talking about this issue of relationships, how many times have we read very good books by you about the importance in terms of marriage and family and child rearing, but even in terms of businesses and corporations, if you don't have good relational skills, you're going to have a disaster on your hands, aren't you?
Well, that's true. What we don't realize, or I think most of us actually do, for example, youngest daughter is a nurse practitioner. Well, guess what keeps her job is not, she used to be a trauma nurse. She can sew up anybody with the best of them. But people don't go, oh, you did such a great job of, sewing me up or, looking at something. It's how many stars do they get? It all has to do with rating. And it's very interesting that, wait a minute, you don't go to, nursing school really to learn how to be relational. But for so many of us, that's the key is with our kids, we're giving them a huge help towards their future when we teach them, like Dewey said, to begin to really, really step out and grab those relational abilities that God's put within a child and given the parent the ability to really communicate. But boy, it's now more than ever. I think you hear that sometimes, but it's so true in this case. We've lost so much relational ground. I don't want to say IQ is overrated, but I'm telling you, we need to be helping our kids become more relational, reconnected, and all the craziness that's going on.
John, let me, if I can, maybe have you talk about an Apple store, because you've got a friend by the name of Mark. And by the way, I've got an Apple here and a PC here, so I'm bilingual. But, bottom line is that a lot of people would think that an Apple store is all about knowing the technical stuff. But you argue in the book it's really about relations, isn't it?
It is. It's so interesting. A buddy of mine, he had been owned a small Christian bookstore, and they, lost their bookstore, and he was in the Apple store, and just was so impressed with the way this guy just, greeted him and connected and solved his problem. And he goes, "Man, do you ever hire people like old people like me?" He was really ready to retire. And he goes, "Yeah." He was the manager. And he goes, "But I don't know very much about computers." And he goes, "You don't have to. What we're looking for are people that can really relate well. We'll teach you as much, all you need to know about the computer part." But again, it's just so important. I think today we're just seeing so much of where the more you withdraw from face-to-face real relationships, and man, our kids have just been hammered in that way. It's time to re-engage with people and real relationships and understand what that is. And, it's just crucial in this day and age.
Dude, let me come to you, because one of the sections here is how relational ability is different from capacity learning. And you just mentioned that a minute ago, because that is a different kind of skill, isn't it?
Well, it is. And when you think about a capacity-based learning, I mean, depending on how you can be assessed, or you can take an assessment or a test, and that'll determine, if you will, how much intelligence you have. In other words, how full am I going to fill this bowl up with my intelligence? Well, like we mentioned a while ago, Kerby, is that God has given every one of us. I mean, we're told in 2 Peter 1:3 that according to his divine nature, he's given us everything that pertains to life and to godliness. And as a parent, what that basically means is that he's given us the ability to parent a child. As that child also has the ability to learn those interpersonal skills that are going to get them through life.
And again, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, if you want a number 1 to 5, we're going to talk about things like secure attachment, fearless exploration, unwavering resilience, wise decision-making, and future-focused serving. And so that's kind of 1 through 5, but it's called the Relationally Intelligent Child, 5 Keys to Helping Your Kids Connect Well with Others. But I have to say, Dewey, as you go through this, I think a lot of us are thinking about how we would apply it to our own lives, too. So you're never too old not to learn something. You can teach old dog new tricks. You can even go to get a PhD at the age of 50-something right. And still make it to the goal line. So these are some things we're going to talk about today, and we are just so privileged to have with us today Dr. John Trent and Dr. Dewey Wilson. And if you find yourself saying, "I'd like to get a copy of the book," we've got all the information you need. You can simply click on the button there at pointofview.net. We have information that will take you to strongfamilies.com, and you will certainly appreciate that. And you also have some of the information for as well, strong marriages. So we have all of that at the website. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
G.K. Chesterton once observed, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. Dennis Prager starts off with that quote to illustrate that nature has become a substitute God for many today. It's not surprising. Many pagan religions have some form of nature worship. They worship the sun god, the moon god, or the goddess of fertility. Today, there's a religious foundation to the environmental movement. We need to protect Mother Earth. Back in the 1970s, James Lovelock developed the Gaia hypothesis and more recently noted that environmentalism has become a religion. But nature worship has run into some tough times with this virus pandemic. Nature can be beautiful, but nature can also be brutal. Alfred Tennyson described nature as red in tooth and claw. There are no moral laws. It's the survival of the fittest. So how should Christians think about nature? Well, first, nature is part of the fallen world and should not be worshipped. G.K. Chesterton explained, nature is not our mother, nature is our sister. We can be proud of her beauty since we have the same father, but she has no authority over us. Second, in Genesis 1:28, God commands us to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. Being fruitful, that is having children, is just the opposite of what environmentalists would allow. One of my professors at Yale was the founder of Zero Population Growth, dedicated to limiting the number of children that could be born. Moreover, environmentalists and animal rights activists reject the idea that humans should subdue nature and have dominion over the earth. An article by Lynn White in the 1960s even blamed Christians and this passage in Genesis for our environmental problems. This pandemic is a reminder that nature is not our friend and nature is not our God. The Christian worldview is the true picture of reality. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. John Trent and Dr. Dewey Wilson. And again, if you want to know more, we have information about strongfamilies.com, strongmarriages.com, and two individuals. And it is going to be great to work our way through this. Just before we get to those 5 keys to helping your kids connect, Dewey, it occurs to me that this is a book that certainly individuals can go through by themselves. And there are places where you can circle numbers and really do a self-assessment. They can also determine whether or not they're a lion or an otter or a golden retriever or a beaver, those kinds of things that we've learned all these years through John Trent. But also the way you've put this together, I'm thinking some people are wondering, what are we going to maybe cover in a small group study this fall? The way you've put this together, it's almost plug and play for anybody that would like to take an entire group through this.
It is, Kerby. Yeah, in fact, one of the chapters, I believe it's chapter 8, where we actually invite each one of the readers to interact with the material. And as you said, they can do a kind of a self-assessment for each one of the chapters that we talk about, each one of the 5 elements. But in addition to that, we also have the Connect assessment, which is the, as you mentioned a while ago, about the lion, otter, golden retriever, and beaver that Dr. Trent actually came up with many years ago. And what we've done is we've actually we have a assessment that for parents that they can take it for their children if their child is 6 or under. And then from 7 to 12, they can look over their child as they take this assessment, and then personality assessment. And then for the older ones, they can also assist them if that child is needed. But what it does, it just really gives the reader the opportunity not just to interact with the material, but also to learn about their child from their personality, their strengths, and what their tendencies are.
And again, if I had a child, this would be the kind of book I'd want to have. I have grandchildren, so this is the kind of book I want to put in the hands of an individual that is raising my grandchild. So that is certainly the case. So it fits very well. So John Trent, let me come to the first one. For people that are numbering 1 to 5, number 1, the first element of relational intelligence is a secure attachment. Can you explain what that is for us?
Yeah, absolutely. For so many of us, we've been, as I've mentioned, just isolated and cut off from people. And here's the bottom line. We are created for connection. I mean, all of the studies on anxiety and depression and everything, we're all either coming out of or trying to come out of, just this whole isolated, lockdown, period, unprecedented period. And there's a huge human cost. But the first thing that really helps to stem that, to push back, that loss is really what we call connection. And can I give you a real quick example?
Please do.
So there was a great study at Virginia Tech where they had this really high hill. Now it was a visual perception study, okay? So who doesn't want to be in a study? They would grab students coming by and, hey, you want to miss class and be in a study? Sure. And they would take people by themselves, and then Kerby, they'd look for two people together. It could be a couple, roommates, but somebody would look connected. So they'd make sure that they were really attached, okay? Well, they'd put a 50-pound pack on, that's a heavy pack, on this person, have them look up at the high hill, and they had to estimate how high is the hill, how hard is it going to be to climb it. And in every case, the ones that were all by themselves, they overshot. It was higher and going to be harder to climb. Well, guess what? When you have somebody next to you with a backpack on, and maybe even with their hand on your shoulder, that other person, the hill shrunk. And man, our kids today are facing some high hills. And when a mom or a dad starts off with that love and attachment and encouragement, and then that it's almost like filling up this tank so that all the other elements of relational intelligence, it really begins with that question that's answered in that kid's life. When I reach out, is somebody going to reach back? Think about the Lord. When I first became a Christian, I was handed a Bible by my young life leader, and he underlined a verse, told me to go home and read it 100 times. He tricked me into going to a Billy Graham movie, and that's where I came to know the Lord. I didn't know who Billy Graham was, but he hands me this Bible, and you know what it was? It was Hebrews 13:5. It says, "For he himself has said, Jesus has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you." Well, I grew up in a single-parent home. Do you see what I'm getting at? I mean, I read that. I get to about 60. I thought he was being metaphorical. I took it literally. So I'm reading it 1, 2, 3, and I get to about 60, and I'm weeping. And it's because, oh, my gosh, I have somebody that's never going to leave me nor forsake me. I've got somebody with their hand on my shoulder. And when we can communicate to that parent, when parents can communicate from the earliest time on with their kids, they're not going to be perfect. That's what we learn in all the other elements. But boy, it starts with a secure attachment.
Dewey, let me come to that, because when we're talking about attachment, we're not talking about codependency. We're talking about a healthy dependency. So sort that out for us, because in some respects, there has been this sort of mindset, and since we're all men around here, the Lone Ranger, of course, even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. I mean, but this idea that I just go it alone, and we sort of reject that because I don't need to be dependent on anybody. But that's not biblical, is it?
Oh, no, not at all. The family was designed by God, and nobody knows how to parent their child any better than the parent themselves.
Yes.
And so, because we hear oftentimes, Kerby, that what if I don't have a secure attachment with my teenager? Is it possible to even reconnect with that individual? Yes, it is. Another verse that John often quotes is out of Proverbs, that it says that glad eyes makes the heart smile.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just a matter of a parent giving them in their countenance a message to the child that says, I believe in you. Even though that child may be off the rails in some ways, it still comes back to the point that God designed the parent to parent the child and to give them, once again, the ability, but also oftentimes we need the skill.
So again, the first one is this idea of a secure attachment. I'm going to keep the train moving down the road because each one of these is a sermon unto itself. And the second one is fearless exploration. Now, if you had asked me to come up with the various elements of relational intelligence, John Trent, I'll admit, I wouldn't have come up with fearless exploration. And yet that's one of the very important elements of relational intelligence. Why so?
Oh, it is, because, if you really think about it, if I were to ask you, Kerby, do you tend to go to the same restaurant, or do you go to, or do you love just trying everything new, or do you kind of ended up going to the same restaurants, or do you just love experimenting?
Well, again, this is where you begin to see the difference between a husband and a wife, because when I come in, if I find something on the menu I've never seen before, I'm all game. And I'm quite content to try new restaurants, and my wife is liking that routine. But you recognize that is a difference in personality. But this idea of exploration really is a key part of relational intelligence, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because what I'm getting at is for some of us, man, we're done exploring. And for a lot of people, they just want to go to the 2 places or 3 places, that are around them. But guess what they've done before that is they're at a different place than their kids. Their kids, in most cases, and of course, you're such a kid at heart, you're still willing to try things, which is great. But boy, kids, when they try things, that's really that opportunity to try something new, to go to do something different. Now, sure, sometimes it's climbing a tree and it's, wait a minute, I've gotten up too high, or maybe it's, there's so many ways in which we try to, helicopter parent, or now it's called snowplow parent, where we try to smooth everything out of the way. But what exploration does is, with attachment, I'm ready to go out and try something, and that's a key part of it.
I think it is. We need to take a break, and there are so many more points. And given the fact that we have 5 and we've only covered 2, going to see if we can cover the other 3 after the break. If you'd like to join the conversation, feel free to give us a call. But I suspect this may be one of those interviews where you maybe just want to sit back and listen and take some notes. But we've been talking about a couple of different aspects of this already. The first one, of course, is this idea of secure attachment. The second, fearless exploration. We come back, though, we'll talk about unwavering resilience. Very important one. I can see why that is the case. And then, of course, wise decision-making and future-focused service. And then kind of the starting point. How do you begin to put all of this together? And it is a book that is published by Northfield, which is an imprint of Moody, about 160 pages, very well written by 2 very gifted individuals. And if you'd like to know more about strong families or strong marriages, we have all those links on our website at pointofview.net. We're going to take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests, by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook. Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, talking with Dr. Dewey Wilson, Dr. John Trent. If you find yourself saying, boy, this came too fast, I'd like to hear it again, don't forget we have an opportunity for you to download the podcast, or, of course, you can also watch it. Dewey Wilson in studio, John Trent by phone, and, of course, it'll also be on the YouTube channel within about an hour or so. So if you would like to watch it again, listen to it again, pass it on to others, please do so. And, Dewey, just before we get back to this, it occurs to me that as we talk about these different aspects of relational intelligence, and we look at these different elements, you have been a home builder, first a home builder, then a marriage builder, because you were in the construction business. You recognize that each element builds on something else. If you don't have a firm foundation, you don't really have a very good home, right?
That's exactly right, Kerby. I mean, how many of us walk into a home that's new, and we're looking around and we're amazed at all of the different trim and all of the different aspects. But how many of us walk into the home and first thing we say is, man, this is the most incredible foundation I think I've ever stood on. We don't. But at the end of the day, as you said a while ago, it is. I mean, if that foundation is not done right, then the rest of the home over time is definitely not going to endure.
And so, again, in some respects, each one of these rests on another. So we've talked about attachment, fearless exploration. How about this one? Unwavering resilience. I would certainly have put that one on the list, because I see some people that are almost crater because of some mistake, some failure. And yet, to quote Erwin Lutzer, who sat in that chair with us before, he wrote a book years ago, Failure, the Back Doors to Success. Most of the people I know that are successful had some really significant failures in their life, and we need to teach our children to be resilient and not just completely fall apart if they lose a soccer game or they don't do well in school. And that's one of the things that part of relational intelligence, isn't it?
It definitely is. Yeah. You know, I grew up with a dad that was a man's man, Kerby. And, he used to tell me, when I'd fall down, he'd say, you know what, I've had worse than that on the tip of my tongue, and still could whistle a song. And he wouldn't let you fail. And he used to, he also would say things like, failure is only failure when you abandon what it is that you're attempting to do. Oftentimes we just, it's been so easily afforded to us, Kerby, in culture, that to let our children, one thing we do is we get them involved in too many things, but then we've given them the permission too easily just to quit. And when you think about the secure attachment, when there's a secure attachment, it gives a child more confidence to be able to explore their world. I mean, how many times have you seen a toddler fall down and the first thing they do is they look back to see where the parent's at? And it gives them kind of a home-based perspective of that, they're there, my parents are there. And that also, the more they explore their world, then the more they're going to fall down, and then over time, it's not the failure that ultimately defines the individual. It's what they do through the failure, sure. And that builds resilience.
One of the things, John Trent, that we have done is we've interviewed some of the authors of, for example, The Coddling of the American Mind, and one of the authors is a Christian, but we actually had Jonathan Haidt on, who's not a Christian, wouldn't necessarily sign the doctrinal statement of our church, but they talk about this idea of people that have today this idea of fragility, and we have to have trigger warnings and all of the rest. And this whole idea of resilience is something we need to pass on to our kids so they know how to stand up to bullies. They know that they don't have to be devastated by rejection. So that is a really key point, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And, you can take that even down to the anxiety. It's amazing how many kids today are suffering from tremendous anxiety. And guess where a big part of that comes from is just what you said. Boy, I didn't get as many likes as my friend. I'm so-and-so wore something. They didn't even say anything to me, but they wore something, and that triggered me to. And we need safe spaces in a way that hey, I'm all for having a chapel or a room somebody could go into, but when it's like, well, no, you need to have a safe space from people that might say something, because what we become is we just become hyper alert and hypersensitive. It's like people are walking around with relational sunburn. It's kind of like they're just so incredibly hypersensitive. So again, part of why we're, I think saying if there was ever a great time to really help your kids be able to, show up at a soccer practice and here's a new group of kids and be able to walk up to them. Well, it comes from that secure attachment that then lets me go explore. And okay, if somebody doesn't like me, well, then I can get back up, and they're not the only person, and it doesn't just totally crater my life. So, boy, you're exactly right. It's just for that being so fragile, which isn't the same as sensitive. It can be really harmful.
Dewey, I know that the chairman of the Strong Marriages Board of Directors is Eric and Caroline, and they're very intentional, you said, about teaching their daughters on how to interact with people different from them. And this is, of course, one of the challenges I think we face in the church. We're so used to interacting. Let's just, take even church where you go to. The kids go to Prestonwood Christian Academy. They go to Prestonwood Church. All their friends are Christian, and all of a sudden they meet a Muslim or they meet an atheist. And they don't know what to do. And you have actually talked about the fact that the chairman of your board has worked really hard to teach the daughters how to interact with people that are very different from them.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Eric and Caroline said that one of the things they love to do is they take their children to the mall. And they really encourage them. But here again, they lead the way. And their children have a secure attachment. They have an understanding of what it means to explore. And does it mean that all of the kids, because he has 4 daughters, bless his heart, but but each one
sorority.
of these, but each one of these girls have a different personality. And so what they've done is they've learned to love them and learn, go to school, really basically be a student of their child to see what their personalities are. And they encourage them to interact with strangers based on, what their personalities are, and showing them by leading the way and saying, you know what, these people may be different from you, but that doesn't mean that you can't develop a relationship with them. We are so inclined, as you said, Kerby, to stay in our holy huddles, or just to stay in not even in the zip code that we live in. Oftentimes it's just the very same experiences that we go from day to day to day. We wake up, we go to school, we go to work, and then we finish, we come home, and we don't interact with other people, especially face to face.
We've talked about some of the studies that have been done about people living in bubbles. Now, the bubbliest zip codes tend to be in places like Manhattan Island and Silicon Valley, but we Christians have some bubble zones there as well, so it's just another reminder. But let's keep going, and John, let me come to you one more time before we take a break. The 4th element is wise decision-making. This has always been something that I've said as a parent. I know you've written about it as well. If I can get my kids to make wise decisions, especially about who they have as their friends, a lot of the problems that parents have simply go away, don't they?
Well, that's true, but I think a lot of us would also say, kind of like with resilience, a lot of the ways they learn good decision making is making some poor decisions. And I have a really smart twin brother. And he got we're fraternal. I can brag on him. But there's just some kids that they almost have to touch the stove.
Oh, yeah.
Other kids watch their sibling do it and go, well, I'm not going to do that. But it's that whole idea of not perfection. I'm telling you, it's so important to help kids realize that as you make, decisions, for some kids, we live in such an Instagram, everything looks just photoshopped and awesome and tremendous. And it's okay for life to be messy. It's okay to make some mistakes. Now, what have you learned from that?
Yes.
And man, I can remember my mom, sitting down with us guys, and me in particular, because Jeff rarely did anything wrong, and I did a lot of times. And yet, but I wasn't cut off because I made a bad decision, but I was really encouraged to, okay, what would be different? What could be different? And so that's the kind of thing we're doing with that.
Yes, and I love that one piece where you were just convinced that means you don't love me anymore, and your mother looks you in the face and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We're coming to a break, but Dewey had a chance. You had an older brother, 2 years older, so you got to see all his mistakes, right? So that helped you out.
That's right. Yeah, I went to the school of note to self.
Note to self. He made a mistake. I'm not going to make that mistake. Anyway, we'll take a break, and we'll come back with the fifth element, which is a future-focused service. And again, we're going through this fairly quickly, but this is to give you an overview, and I really do commend the book to you. It is easy to find. It came out in April. You might find it in your local bookstore, but we, of course, have links to strong families and strong marriages. You can find it there. Of course, we have information on our website. We will take a break. We'll come back with one more point right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, again, talking about the Relationally Intelligent Child, 5 keys to helping your kids connect well with others. John Trent, Dewey Wilson. And Dewey, just for a minute, let's, if we can, talk about the fifth element, and then I'll get some comments from John about how to use the book, future-focused service. And, of course, you talk about your wife, Lynn, making cakes, but I think you probably want to talk about your daughter because she, well, actually, you got wonderful daughters, but one in particular I think you're going to emphasize.
Yeah, Kerby, thank you. Yeah, my youngest daughter, Erin, and she was gifted in a lot of things, but one of the things she definitely was gifted in was in singing. And she started singing when she was 5 years old at I think the first thing she ever performed in was, you remember the old the Christmas shows that they perform at Prestonwood. And at 5 years old, she sang "Happy Birthday, Jesus." Well,
I remember that.
You know, Lynn and I can't carry a tune across the street. So and neither can Lynn. But you know, God created her with voice and a heck of a voice at that. Well, it's kind of like in the book when we talk about Lynn making this cake. You know, she takes two cakes that are formed in a rectangle, and then she creates a Winnie the Pooh cake out of this thing. And she said, you know, it's not so difficult when you've already got what you're going for in mind. And you know, that really brings it down to home. When there's a secure attachment, when there's the ability to explore their world with confidence and an unwavering resilience, and over the years there's wise decision making. And we're in no way a perfect family. In fact, I guarantee you we probably spent a whole lot more time trying to figure out how to do things right than anything else. But it was so fun to watch Erin when she had these four elements, and she knew that she did. It was so fun to watch her begin to expand her world by realizing that God created her for a purpose. And, you know, He's given in every one of us a purpose, a mission. You know, what we need to do sometimes is just find out what that mission statement is and to get on board with what He's doing. And with both of our daughters, even our oldest one, I mean, she's done... Tiffany, yeah, she's done such a great job, and she's just here at the Texas Tech School of Nursing here in Dallas. And, you know, what I guess the bottom line, Kerby, is that when you allow these kids to go through the first four of these elements, and you get to see the joy and experience the joy as a parent of watching them do what God's created and gifted them to do.
Let's talk about, for just a minute, the rest of the story, because they hear about a 5-year-old singing "Happy Birthday, Jesus," and I do remember that very vividly, but then going to Liberty, going to First Baptist, this has continued all the way through her experience, hasn't it?
That's right, yeah, and she's now 33 years old, and I don't picture a time in life where she'll never not be leading worship.
Yes.
Because this child has she's got a heart for worship, and that's how God created her to be.
And again, just an incredible story, and you can read more about some of that in the book. But John Trent, we only got a couple of minutes left, and one of the chapters is the starting point plan for applying relational intelligence. And this certainly plays to your strength, because anybody's ever heard John Trent at whether it's Pine Cove or Sky Ranch or half a dozen other camps, you'll talk about lions and otters and golden retrievers and beavers. And so some of this is an opportunity for you now to do an assessment of your child or grandchild. Can you take us through that?
Oh, yeah. You know, I'll go back to what Dewey said, that we are living so much in a time of a crisis of just purpose. You know, I hear so many people, and it's just, well, is it even worth it? Or what should I be doing? And one of the things about teaching your kids to be relationally intelligent is you help them understand their strengths. You know, you look at Romans chapter, there were 4 times there were lists of spiritual gifts in the scripture, and all of those gifts are to help somebody else. You know, they're not just meant to, puff ourselves up. And when your kid gets filled up with love and blessing and encouragement and attachment and understands who they are, and with those animals are a great way to do that. But there's so much more that we, teach them by taking that version of the Connect assessment and really starting to get a plan. Well, just like Dewey said, it's like filling up a glass, and now they're ready to just tip over. And with both of our girls, the same thing. We're so blessed and privileged that they're going out to change their world because they're doing it from a place of, fullness in Christ and who they are and purpose. And man, we need that. I just read a study today where in California, suicide with kids 18 and under jumped 24% last year. It fell 11% for adults. It is kids who are getting absolutely devastated with what's going on today. So helping your kid become relationally intelligent isn't a minor deal. It's a huge way to bless them and encourage them and give them a direction as well.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about your website. So just before we run out of time, John, we have strongfamilies.com, and talk about what's available there, because there are some great resources in addition, of course, to this book, but all sorts of other resources that would be available to our listeners. So what will they find when they land on your website?
Well, just one thing I'll highlight, lots of tools, the blessing and the personalities, but we're doing a lot of coaching as well, strengths coaching around the Connect assessment. And if anybody wants to be a life coach, we do something called life mapping. So coaching is really big as well.
And I might also mention, Dewey, that we have the link to strongmarriages.com, which is an organization and a ministry that I highly recommend. And I know so many people that have benefited from that. But again, if people want to know more about marriage mentors and things of that nature, what will they find when they land on the website?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the one thing, in fact, the ministry actually started, Kerby, with marriage mentoring, and so what we developed is actually a 1-year process by which mentors can actually go online, and using our tools can actually get trained as a mentor to come alongside another couple to help them enrich and if not even restore their relationship. Then another tool we have is I Promise, which is our premarital resource.
Yes.
That really that's one of our that's really one of our very popular resources that we have that we're sending it out all over the world right now. But and then also we have the Connect assessment that we use in multiple resources, along with what John was talking about a while ago.
Well, again, you'll find out more about John Trent and Cindy, as well as Dewey and Lynn. And, of course, if you get this book, you'll learn about their daughters and about their own particular challenges. But most importantly, you'll learn about these very important 5 elements of relational intelligence. So, Dr. John Trent, always great to have you on the program, and I just look forward to the next opportunity.
Hey, thank you.
And Dewey Wilson, thank you for passing the book on, and thank you for being such a good friend, and thank you for being in studio today.
That's right, Kerby. Thank you.
One last time, this is a 10-chapter book that I think you're going to find very helpful. It is published by Northfield Publishing, which is basically the imprint of Moody. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if not, we've given you information about strong marriages and strong families, and you will find in these chapters the 5 elements that we've talked about, as well as maybe a starting point plan that you can develop. If you have a child or a grandchild, it's kind of a must read. And I appreciate these 2 individuals. Any one of them could have actually carried an entire program. To actually have 2 of them just over the top. So it was great to have both of them here today. If you'd like more information, we have all of that available at our website, pointofview.net. You can go to, of course, strongfamilies.com, strongmarriages.com, but, of course, you can simply go to our website, pointofview.net, and we have all the links there. One last time, let me just mention that if this went too fast, you'd like to listen to it again, or you know somebody you think would really benefit from hearing that, simply go to our website. There's a button that says watch or listen. You can listen to it just as a podcast or watch it, or even go to the YouTube channel, send it to them and say, I think you might really benefit from this. And, of course, these books are now available, and we certainly encourage you to take the time to read them and apply them. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow on our weekend edition right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.